It's the kind of town that feels stuck in time, a place where everyone knows everyone else, and the days blur together. The streets are quiet, but there's always a strange tension hanging in the air. The town of Edgewood had its peculiarities, but nothing ever seemed to raise alarms. That is, until the day the vegetable seller disappeared. Every morning, an old man named Gregor would set up his wooden cart by the town square. His produce was always fresh, and there was something comforting about his quiet, grizzled presence. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his voice was soft, raspy, like it hadn't been used in years. Gregor was a man of few words, yet for the past 15 years, he had been a steady presence in Edgewood. Some said his vegetables were different, richer in color, more flavorful than anything anyone else had ever tasted. But it wasn't just the produce that intrigued the town. It was Gregor himself. He seemed timeless, almost otherworldly. The townspeople never questioned where he came from or why he stayed. After all, there was no reason to. He'd always been there. But one winter morning, the unthinkable happened. Gregor didn't show up. The cart, with its usual arrangement of neatly stacked fruits and vegetables, was absent from its usual spot by the old oak tree. And though the market square was filled with the bustle of the town's early risers, there was an eerie stillness where Gregor should have been. At first, it wasn't cause for alarm. People assumed he had simply taken a sick day or gone to tend to something personal. But when the days turned to weeks and still no sign of Gregor, the whispers started. There were rumors that he had left town suddenly, or worse, that something had happened to him. The mystery began to stir something deep in the hearts of the people. Gregor had been a fixture in their lives. He was a piece of the puzzle that made Edgewood, well, Edgewood. His absence left a void. People felt uneasy. They began to ask questions. And the more questions they asked, the more they realized that Gregor's past was clouded in mystery. It wasn't just the old man's disappearance that troubled them. It was his cart, his vegetables, the strange, lingering feeling that something was very wrong. The story began to unravel the moment a group of curious souls decided to investigate Gregor's home. It was a small cottage on the outskirts of town, nestled between thick trees that shielded it from the rest of Edgewood. The kind of place that always felt just a little too quiet, too secluded. When the group arrived, they were struck by the eerie silence that hung in the air. No sounds of life, no birds, no rustling wind. Just the weight of something heavy, almost suffocating. The door was unlocked, which, though strange, wasn't all that surprising. Gregor hadn't been known for locking things up. His life, much like his personality, was simple, straightforward. At least, that's what everyone thought. Inside, the house was cold, despite the hearth being freshly stoked. The air had that peculiar, musty smell, a mixture of old wood earth and something faintly sweet. As the group made their way through the small, dimly lit rooms, they couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The floor creaked with each step, and the flickering light from their lanterns cast long, trembling shadows against the walls. In the kitchen, the first strange thing was discovered. A basket sat on the table, filled with the most beautiful, vibrant vegetables the group had ever seen. Perfectly round tomatoes, gleaming carrots, even lettuce so green it almost seemed to glow in the dim light. It was an odd sight, considering Gregor had never left vegetables behind before. His routine had always been to pick fresh produce each morning and sell it by evening. The vegetables on the table were perfect, unnaturally perfect, and something about them made the hairs on the back of the group's neck stand up. It wasn't just the vegetables that unsettled them, though. It was the note. It was tucked under the basket, carefully folded, as if Gregor had left it there intentionally. One of the members of the group, a local journalist named Sarah, unfolded the paper. Her eyes skimmed over the words before her breath caught in her throat. The harvest comes at a cost. No one leaves the land untouched. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. The words were cryptic, unsettling, and unlike anything Gregor had ever said. They seemed to carry a warning about something that had been hidden for far too long. The group left Gregor's house, but the strange feeling lingered with them. As they discussed what they had found, they realized something significant. They didn't know Gregor's true history. No one did. It was as if the man had appeared in Edgewood one day, and no one had ever thought to question where he had come from or why. They didn't know how he had acquired his vegetables, or what his connection to the land truly was. Determined to uncover the truth, Sarah began to dig deeper. She went to the town's archives, hoping to find some clue as to Gregor's past. There, she found something unexpected. The records on Gregor were incomplete. There was no mention of when he had first arrived in Edgewood, and no official documentation about his life before he appeared. It was as though Gregor had always been there, and no one had ever questioned it. But there was one document that stood out, a faded letter dated many years before. The letter had been written by a man named Elias Grange, a wealthy landowner who had once lived in Edgewood. The letter was addressed to a local official, but its contents were chilling. Gregor's presence in this town is not by chance. The land he tends is cursed. He must be stopped before it consumes us all. Sarah's heart raced as she read the words. She had heard stories of old curses, of towns plagued by dark forces, but she had never taken them seriously. But this was different. There was something about the letter's tone, its urgency, that struck a deep chord within her. She had to know more. Sarah's investigation led her to a meeting with the town's oldest resident, a frail woman named Ethel, who had lived in Edgewood her entire life. Ethel's mind was sharp, despite her age, and when Sarah mentioned Gregor's name, the old woman's face went pale. "You shouldn't be looking into this," Ethel whispered, her voice trembling. "You don't know what you're asking. Gregor isn't just a seller of vegetables. He's tied to the land itself. The harvest he brings, those perfect crops, they come from a dark pact." Sarah leaned in, urging Ethel to continue, her curiosity now a full-blown obsession. The old woman sighed and began to recount a tale that had been whispered in Edgewood for generations. Years ago, the land had been barren, unable to produce even the simplest of crops. The townspeople were desperate, struggling to survive. In their desperation, they made a pact with an unknown force, a force that promised to bless the land with fertility, but at a price. The price was a soul. A life would be taken every year, and in return, the harvest would be bountiful. But the townspeople, in their greed and fear, had forgotten the cost of the pact. Gregor had been the one chosen to carry out the pact. He was the keeper of the harvest, the one who ensured the crops grew, but he was also the one who took the souls to feed the land. It was said that Gregor's vegetables were not of this world, that they were nourished by the souls of those who had disappeared over the years, fed to the earth in exchange for the land's bounty. Part 5. The realization hit Sarah like a thunderclap. Gregor wasn't just a humble vendor. He was a keeper of a dark, ancient secret. And now, with him gone, the town was left vulnerable. But there was more. As Sarah retraced the steps of those who had gone missing in the past, she found a chilling pattern. The disappearances always occurred after the harvest. The victims were never seen again, their bodies never found. The land had taken them, just as it had taken Gregor. It was then that Sarah realized the horrifying truth. Gregor hadn't disappeared of his own accord. The land had taken him. He had become the last soul to feed the earth. And now, without him, Edgewood would fall into ruin. The harvest would fail. The land would turn against them. In a final desperate act, Sarah stood before the grave of Elias Grange, the man who had warned of Gregor's dark role. She understood now that the cycle had to be broken, that the pact could no longer be sustained. But breaking it would come at a cost, one that she wasn't sure she was willing to pay. The mystery of the vegetable seller had been solved. But the true horror lay in what she now understood. Some dark forces were beyond human control, and Edgewood's fate was sealed. The story of Gregor, the vegetable seller, remains a cautionary tale in Edgewood. Some say Sarah never returned after that night, her search for answers lost to the earth. Others say she was a final soul taken by the land, another victim of the Dark Pact. The harvests no longer grow in Edgewood. The town lies barren, its streets empty, its people gone. The lamb that once fed them now feeds only itself, and the shadow of Gregor's curse lingers in the air, waiting for the next soul to pay the price. And so, the question remains, what really happened to the vegetable seller? The answer is buried beneath the soil, hidden in the roots of the very land he tended, where no one can reach it. But perhaps the real question is, who's next? The morning after Sarah uncovered the truth about Gregor, the sense of dread in Edgewood grew unbearable. The town felt off, like it was teetering on the edge of something dark, something inevitable. The once bustling streets now echoed with an unsettling silence, broken only by the wind rustling through the barren trees. The air itself seemed heavier, laden with a sense of doom that clung to every corner. The more Sarah thought about the cursed pact, the more she understood just how deeply ingrained the curse was in Edgewood's very soil. Gregor hadn't simply disappeared, he had been claimed, and the land, hungry for its next soul, would not let go of its grip so easily. But despite the terror that had taken root in her mind, Sarah couldn't stop herself from investigating further. It was as if the mystery had sunk its claws deep into her, and now she was just as much a part of it as the town itself. She knew she couldn't face this alone. She reached out to Daniel, her old friend and an investigative journalist who had left town years ago but had always been fascinated by the strange happenings in Edgewood. He agreed to meet her and travel back to the town, hoping to uncover the final pieces of the puzzle. When Daniel arrived, the town was as eerie as Sarah had described. His eyes darted around, taking in the abandoned market square, the empty houses, the streets that should have been filled with life but were instead ghostly quiet. There was something wrong in the way the buildings sagged, as though the weight of years of forgotten horrors had caused them to bow in on themselves. "Are you sure about this?" Daniel asked, his voice a whisper. "I mean, this place, it feels wrong." "I don't have a choice," Sarah replied. "You saw what I found. This town, it's all connected to Gregor. We have to figure out what happened to him, or whatever's left of him, and stop whatever is coming next." Daniel nodded, though unease lingered in his eyes. The two of them walked through the streets, retracing Sarah's earlier steps. They headed back to Gregor's cottage, determined to dig deeper into the man's past. The house felt even colder than it had the last time they were there, and as they entered, a wave of dread washed over them. "Look around," Sarah said, her voice tight. "We missed something." They started scouring the house once more, this time more methodical in their search. Daniel rifled through drawers, finding nothing but dusty old kitchen tools. Sarah examined the walls closely, searching for any hint of the dark secrets that might still linger within the cottage. It was then that her gaze fell upon the floorboard beneath the kitchen table, though it looked older, worn in a way that didn't quite match the rest of the house. A faint creak sounded as she pressed down, revealing a small, hidden compartment. She pulled the board back, revealing a weathered box, locked tight. The box was adorned with strange symbols that Sarah recognized from her research in the town's archives. They weren't just ordinary markings. They were symbols of protection. But from what? Daniel joined her, his brow furrowed. "What do you think it is?" Sarah hesitated before gently lifting the box. She knew whatever was inside was important. Whatever secrets Gregor had been hiding for so long were contained within this box, and it was only a matter of time before they would come to light. She found a key hidden beneath the tablecloth, one that fit perfectly into the lock. The sound of the box opening was unnervingly loud in the stillness of the cottage. Inside, they found a collection of items, old, tattered maps, a few worn notebooks, and a jar of what appeared to be soil dark and thick, almost like blood. "What is this?" Daniel muttered, picking up the jar carefully. "Gregor's harvest," Sarah whispered, her eyes scanning the contents of the box. "The soil? It's not ordinary dirt. This is where the land's power comes from. This is what feeds it." The maps detailed the land surrounding Edgewood, with several locations marked in red. The markings formed a pattern, a ritualistic pattern, one that led deep into the woods surrounding the town. Sarah felt a shiver crawl down her spine as she traced the lines with her fingers. "They've been feeding something," she murmured. "And Gregor, he was part of it. He had to have been. These maps, they're leading us to something." Daniel's eyes were wide with realization. Do you think the town's been complicit in this all along? That they knew what Gregor was doing?" Sarah's stomach churned. "It's worse than that. They might not have even realized it. The pact, it's ancient. It's part of the town's foundation, hidden in the land itself. The people of Edgewood didn't just rely on Gregor for their food. They unknowingly sustained the curse every time they ate." The weight of her words sank in. The land had been feeding on them, using Gregor as its keeper. But now that he was gone, the land was restless. And without someone to tend to it, it would take more than just the crops. It would take the people, with the box in hand. Sarah and Daniel ventured into the woods. The trees here were dense, their twisted branches clawing at the sky, blocking out much of the light. It felt as though they were entering a forgotten part of the world, a place untouched by time. The further they ventured, the more oppressive the air became. Every step seemed to carry a weight that was heavier than the last. The woods seemed to close in on them, the trees whispering in a language they couldn't understand. As they reached the first marked location on the map, they came across an old stone circle, its stones worn and chipped by centuries of weathering. But there was something else, a strange aura in the air, a sense of power that radiated from the ground beneath their feet. This was the heart of the land's curse. Sarah knelt down, her fingers brushing the dirt. The soil was warm, unnaturally warm, and as her fingers sank into it, a cold, sharp pain shot through her hand. She yanked it back, gasping for breath. "What's happening?" Daniel asked, his voice trembling. "It's alive," Sarah whispered, her mind racing. "This is where the pact was made. The land it's feeding off us. It needs us." Daniel looked around, his expression growing more frantic. "We have to stop it, Sarah, before it takes anyone else." But it was too late. A low, guttural growl vibrated through the earth, and the ground began to tremble. The trees shuddered, their limbs rattling as if some unseen force was rising from the soil. And from the darkness of the woods, they saw it, a figure, cloaked in shadow, emerging from the depths of the land. It was Gregor, or what was left of him. His eyes were hollow, his skin stretched tight over bones that seemed to creak with each movement. "You shouldn't have come here." Gregor's voice rasped, a hollow echo of the man he had once been. Sarah's heart sank. "Gregor, what happened to you?" "I became what the land needed," Gregor said, his voice thick with sorrow and something darker. "And now you will too." With that, the ground around them split open and the land's hunger surged forward. In the end, Sarah and Daniel were just two more souls claimed by Edgewood. The town remains abandoned, its streets empty and haunted. No one dares enter the woods, for fear of the curse that still lingers, waiting for its next offering. The tale of Gregor and the town's dark history lives on, whispered in the wind, a warning for those who would dare uncover the horrors hidden beneath the soil. And so, the mystery of the vegetable seller and his dark pact remains, but the question still echoes in the empty streets of Edgewood. Who will be next? It had been weeks since Sarah and Daniel disappeared into the woods, and still, the town of Edgewood remained eerily silent. The streets, once filled with the sound of daily life, were now barren, and the market square, the place where Gregor had once stood selling his bountiful crops, was nothing but a forgotten memory. The people of Edgewood, if there had been any left to begin with, were gone, swallowed by the land's unyielding hunger. But though the town seemed lifeless, Edgewood had not forgotten. The curse had not been lifted. In fact, the events that transpired had set something far more dangerous in motion, something that had been lying dormant beneath the surface of the earth for centuries. The ground around the stone circle in the woods was still disturbed, as though the earth itself had been scarred by the events that had unfolded there. Sarah and Daniel's disappearance left a lingering mark on the land, a whisper that carried in the wind, a warning to anyone foolish enough to venture too close. But, like the land itself, the curse had a hunger that could not be quelled. The disappearance of Gregor, Sarah, and Daniel was only a small part of something much larger. The land needed more. It craved more, and that's when he came, the last person who could unravel the mystery of Edgewood. Elias Grange had left the town long ago. He was the one who had written the warning letter Sarah had found, the one that had urged the townspeople to stop Gregor before it was too late. But Elias wasn't just any landowner. He had been the one who originally struck the bargain with the unknown force that had bound Edgewood to its curse. And though he had tried to break free, he had never been able to. He had spent years searching for a way to sever the connection between the land and the force that had taken hold of it. But every time he thought he had found a way, the land had found a way to draw him back in. The power was too strong. It had been growing for generations, feeding off the souls of the people who had come and gone. And now, Elias had returned, hoping against hope that he could finally end the madness. His arrival wasn't an accident. He had sensed a disturbance in the earth, the ripple caused by Sarah and Daniel's failed attempt to stop the curse. The balance had shifted. The land was restless, and something far darker than Gregor had ever been had begun to stir beneath its surface. Elias knew this would be his last chance. But when he arrived in Edgewood, he found it even worse than he had feared. The land had become an almost sentient being, its hunger insatiable. The earth itself was alive, breathing, pulling at the fabric of the town. The stone circle in the woods was now pulsing with energy, the air thick with malevolent intent. There was something waiting for him, something he could not fight with mere knowledge or ancient rituals. Elias made his way toward the circle, his every step filled with trepidation. He had to act quickly, before the land claimed him, before it fed on his soul like it had done to so many before him. But as he stepped into the clearing, the ground shifted beneath his feet. The earth seemed to reach out, pulling him toward the center of the circle. His heart raced. This was it. He had no choice but to confront it. But what he didn't know was that Gregor was not the only one the land had claimed. The trees parted as Elias stepped deeper into the clearing. The air was thick with a musty, rotting scent, and the ground beneath him felt wrong, alive somehow, pulsating with an unseen force. The stone circle loomed before him, its ancient stones cracked and weathered, now glowing faintly in the twilight. He had been here before, years ago, when he had first made the ill-fated pact with the unknown force that had cursed the land. He had come with hope that the harvest would save his people, but now all he had was regret. The land had taken so much, and now it wanted more. In the center of the circle, the earth was open, a dark, gaping hole that seemed to swallow the very light. And there, standing at the edge, was Gregor. But this was not the Gregor Elias had known. The man standing before him was a twisted version of himself, no longer human, his body gaunt and decayed. His eyes were hollow, black voids that stared through Elias with a chilling emptiness. "Gregor?" Elias said, his voice hoarse, barely a whisper. The figure that was once Gregor tilted its head, the hollow sockets of its eyes shifting toward Elias. A faint, broken laugh echoed through the trees. "You thought you could stop it." Gregor's voice was a rasp, an unsettling blend of sorrow and malice. "The land is hungry, Elias. It always has been, and it will take everything." Elias stepped forward, his heart hammering in his chest. He knew what he had to do, but he also knew that this would cost him everything. The only way to stop the land's curse was to sever the connection once and for all. But it required a sacrifice, a soul willing to give itself to the land, to break the pact from the inside. Gregor, or whatever had become of him, was no longer the key. The land had moved beyond him, and now Elias knew that he, too, would have to pay the price. "Stop!" Elias shouted, his hands outstretched. "It doesn't have to be this way. We can still end it. But Gregor's twisted form shook its head. You know it's too late. The land does not forgive. The ground beneath Elias cracked open, and the earth began to rise, tendrils of soil and roots emerging from the depths, grabbing at his ankles. The earth was alive, pulling at him, hungry for his soul. He could feel its power, its grip tightening around him, suffocating him. With a desperate cry, Elias fought back, but the earth was too strong. His hands sank into the soil as he fell to his knees. He could see the shadowy figure of Gregor above him, its eyes empty and cold, watching him with a silent, pitiless gaze. "This is the price," Gregor whispered. "The price for the harvest." The world around Elias began to blur, and the earth swallowed him whole. The last thing he heard was the sound of the land, breathing, feeding. The town of Edgewood was no more. Its people, its history, consumed by the land's insatiable hunger. The curse of Edgewood was not broken that night. The land continued to feed, its power growing with every passing year, always waiting for its next offering. The stone circle still pulses in the woods, a reminder of the pact that no one could escape. The mystery of the vegetable cellar, of Gregor and the curse that bound him to the earth, remains unsolved. The town is nothing but a distant memory, its history lost to time. But one question still lingers. Will Edgewood ever be free? Or will the land continue its hunger, forever claiming souls, its curse never lifted? And somewhere, deep beneath the earth, the roots stretch further, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to uncover the truth. Years passed, and Edgewood slowly faded from the memories of those who had once lived there. The town became nothing more than a forgotten ghost story, a whispered legend that parents told their children to keep them from wandering too far into the woods. But the curse that had been bound to the land did not dissipate with the passage of time. No, it grew more powerful. The hunger that had once been contained was now an unrelenting force, seeking its next victim. Edgewood became a place of myth, a place too dangerous to visit, too cursed to touch. Yet, like all dangerous places, there were always those who felt the irresistible pull of the unknown, those who believed they could uncover the truth without facing the consequences. And this time, the curse would be tested again, by those who had no idea what they were walking into. It all began when a group of university students, intrigued by local legends and determined to create a documentary about forgotten towns, decided to visit the abandoned streets of Edgewood. The group, led by an ambitious film student named Anna, were no strangers to dark, abandoned places. They had ventured into countless haunted houses, cemeteries, and asylums, always eager to capture the eerie on film. But Edgewood was different. There was an atmosphere about it, a heaviness that they could feel even before they stepped foot inside its boundaries. Anna had researched the town's history, and despite the dark stories, there was something that intrigued her. The idea of an ancient curse, a forgotten pact, a town swallowed by its own greed. This was the kind of story that could launch her career into the limelight. She was willing to take the risk, despite the warnings she had received from the locals. After all, it was just an old ghost story, right? The group, consisting of Anna, her friend Mark, a sound technician named Lisa, and 2 other students, arrived in Edgewood in the late afternoon, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The town greeted them with an eerie stillness. The streets were quiet, and the buildings, though worn and decayed, still stood as silent witnesses to the passage of time. There was no sign of life, only the faintest rustling of wind through the trees. But as they ventured deeper into the heart of the town, something seemed to shift in the air. The temperature dropped, and a strange, almost oppressive feeling settled over them. "Let's set up camp here," Anna suggested, her voice cutting through the thick silence. "We'll get some shots of the town, and then we can check out the woods. We can finish up the shoot before nightfall." Lisa, ever the skeptic, looked around uneasily. "You know, I've heard some things about this place. Some people say the land is alive, that it's cursed, and I don't know if it's a good idea to mess around here." "Oh, please," Mark interjected with a laugh. "It's just a bunch of rumors. There's nothing supernatural about this place. It's just abandoned. Despite Lisa's protests, the group continued with their plan. They set up their equipment, capturing sweeping shots of the empty streets, the dilapidated houses, and the overgrown market square. There was something hauntingly beautiful about the town's desolation. But as the sun dipped lower, the mood shifted. The shadows grew long, and the wind picked up, carrying with it an unsettling whisper that seemed to echo from the trees surrounding them. "All right," Anna said, checking her camera. "Let's go to the woods. We'll get some shots by the stone circle. That should make for some great footage." Though Lisa hesitated, she followed, her unease growing with every step. The others were too focused on their project to notice. The group made their way into the forest, the once familiar path now a maze of twisted trees and dense undergrowth. The deeper they went, the harder it became to see. It was as though the forest itself was swallowing the light, casting everything in an unnatural twilight. When they reached the stone circle, the temperature had dropped significantly. The air was thick, the silence almost suffocating. The stones stood like sentinels, their ancient surfaces slick with moss and time, and in the center of the circle, the earth was cracked open, just as it had been the night Elias Grange had confronted the land's power. Mark, eager to get the perfect shot, approached the center of the circle, his camera held high. "This place is incredible. It's like stepping into another world." Lisa was visibly uncomfortable. "There's something off about this place. I don't like it." Ignoring her warnings, Anna walked over to the edge of the circle. She knelt down, inspecting the ground closely. The soil was warm to the touch, just like it had been for Sarah. And beneath her fingers, she felt a faint vibration, as though something was stirring deep beneath the earth. Suddenly, Mark stopped filming and turned toward her, a look of confusion on his face. "Anna, did you hear that?" A low, guttural growl vibrated through the air, an unnatural sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. The group froze, their hearts racing in their chests. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the trees around them began to sway violently, despite the stillness of the wind. "It's just the wind," Anna said, her voice trembling. But deep down, she knew that wasn't the case. The sound was too deep, too menacing. A shadow moved at the edge of the circle. At first, they thought it was a trick of the light, but then it came closer, a figure, dark and twisted, emerging from the trees. It was tall, impossibly tall, its form shifting, distorted, as though it were made of the very shadows themselves. The shape seemed to ripple and change, and in the center of it, they saw eyes, hollow and dark, like pits of despair. The ground cracked open again, and from the depths, more figures began to rise, more shapes, more shadows, like a swarm of twisted souls clawing their way from the underworld. "We need to leave now," Lisa screamed, her voice breaking. But it was too late. The shadows swarmed toward them, engulfing the group. The air grew thick with the scent of decay, and the earth beneath them began to shift violently, as though it were alive. They were trapped, caught between the hunger of the land and the curse that had bound Edgewood for centuries. Anna, in a moment of clarity, realized that the land wasn't just hungry for souls. It was feeding off their fear, their desperation. It had been waiting for someone to come, to uncover the truth. And now that it had them, it wouldn't let go. One by one, the group was claimed by the earth, swallowed into the dark, cold soil. The land's hunger was insatiable, and no one was safe. As the last of the group disappeared into the earth, the stone circle once again fell silent, the shadows retreating into the woods. Edgewood was empty once more, its curse still alive, still hungry. Edgewood's legend would grow, spreading like wildfire to those seeking a thrill, to those drawn to the mysteries of the past. Yet no one would ever truly understand the horrors that lay buried beneath the town. The land had no end to its hunger, and those who dared to uncover its secrets would forever be trapped in the twisted web of the curse. The question remains unanswered. Who will be next? And somewhere deep beneath the earth, the roots stretch further, waiting, always waiting for the next soul to come too close. As the years passed, the story of Edgewood's curse became nothing more than a whispered legend, a tale told around campfires and at midnight gatherings. Those who had ventured to the abandoned town never returned, their fates sealed by the insatiable hunger of the land. But the mystery remained unsolved, an enigma that refused to die, as if the town itself still had unfinished business. Despite its eerie reputation, there were those who still sought to uncover the truth, even if it meant risking everything. One such person was David Mercer, a paranormal investigator known for his bold approach to uncovering the mysteries of the unknown. Having heard the chilling stories of Edgewood, he became obsessed with the idea of documenting the curse. He believed there was an explanation, something logical that could unravel the dark tales surrounding the town. His career had flourished with his discoveries in haunted asylums and forgotten cemeteries, but Edgewood was different. David had read the reports, seen the footage, and heard the rumors. He knew that something far more sinister lay beneath the town's curse than anyone could fathom. There was talk of strange lights seen in the woods, and of ghostly figures wandering the ruins of the town at night. He believed there had to be a rational explanation for these phenomena, but he also knew that there was a part of him, a small part, that feared the unknown. With his crew of experienced investigators, Sophie, a seasoned medium, and James, an expert in local folklore, David set out to uncover what had happened to Edgewood. They traveled under the cover of darkness, the moonlight casting long shadows on the overgrown path that led into the woods. The air was heavy with an unnatural stillness, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. As they approached the stone circle, David couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, lurking just out of sight. His camera rolled as they carefully set up their equipment. Sophie, eyes closed in concentration, began to chant softly under her breath, trying to sense any spiritual presence around them. James, who had spent hours researching Edgewood's history, stood in front of the circle, studying the ancient stones with a look of deep concern. "This place has an energy to it," James muttered. "It's not like the other haunted sites we've investigated. This feels different, almost alive." David gave him a reassuring smile, though his own unease was growing. "We'll figure it out, James. There's always an explanation." As the night deepened, Sophie began to get a sense of the atmosphere. Her face grew pale as she opened her eyes, sweat beading on her forehead. "There's something here, something ancient, something dark. It's not just ghosts, David. It's something far more powerful, something that isn't bound by the normal rules of the spirit world." David laughed nervously. "I thought you'd say something like that." But Sophie's expression remained grim. "No, you don't understand. This land, it's hungry. It wants us. It wants more." The wind began to pick up, swirling around them like a cyclone. The camera shook in David's hands as he zoomed in on the stone circle. The ground, once cracked and barren, seemed to be shifting beneath their feet. The earth trembled and the temperature dropped sharply. "Do you feel that?" Sophie asked, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "It's as if the land itself is alive. It's moving." David turned toward her, his brow furrowed. "I'm starting to think we need to leave." But before he could speak any further, a loud crack sounded from within the forest. The air was thick with an oppressive pressure as the trees began to sway violently. Despite there being no wind, it was as though the forest itself was closing in on them, forcing them deeper into the cursed ground. "James!" David shouted, but his voice was drowned out by a deep guttural growl, far too loud to come from any living creature. It was the sound of something ancient, something primal. Sophie's eyes widened in terror as she stumbled backward. "It's coming!" Suddenly, from the shadows of the trees, figures began to emerge. They were not human, but twisted, nightmarish shapes. Their bodies were skeletal, their limbs elongated, and their faces, if they could be called faces, were distorted, featureless masks of hunger. These were not ghosts. These were something else entirely. Shadows twisted into grotesque, physical forms, their eyes hollow and dark, their mouths open wide in silent screams. The group backed toward the stone circle, but the land seemed to close in on them. The earth began to crack open, and from the depths, long, dark tendrils of roots and soil began to emerge, wrapping around their legs, pulling them closer to the center of the cursed ground. David felt his heart race as he tried to hold his ground. "We have to break the curse," he muttered, fear rising in his chest. But no matter how much he willed it, the shadows closed in, their figures becoming more defined, more solid, more real. Sophie screamed as one of the shadowy figures lunged toward her. She tried to fight back, but it was like trying to battle smoke. The creature wrapped around her, its form blending with her own, as if it were consuming her very soul. "David! James!" she gasped, her voice choking on the dark air. "You have to leave. It won't stop. It never stops." David reached out to her, but the shadows were too strong. The tendrils of the earth rose higher, pulling Sophie into the ground. Her scream was cut short as the earth swallowed her whole. James was frantic now, pulling at the roots that had ensnared him. "Get away! Get out of here, David. We're not going to make it." David fought to stay calm, but panic began to set in. His breath came in ragged gasps as the shadows closed in around him. He glanced over at James, but before he could react, the ground beneath him gave way, and he was pulled down. His hands clawed at the soil, but it was no use. The earth was alive, and it wanted them all. He heard James scream as the shadows consumed him, and then everything went dark. The sun would rise over Edgewood the next morning, casting a pale light over the cursed town. There would be no signs of the investigators who had ventured into the heart of darkness. No trace of their existence. The land had claimed them, just as it had claimed all those before. Edgewood's curse was far from broken. In fact, it had only grown stronger with every soul it consumed. The stone circle, now silent, stood as a grim reminder of the town's tragic history. The land would wait for the next group of curious souls, wait for the next foolhardy adventurer to wander too close. The legend of Edgewood would live on, an eternal mystery, its dark secrets buried deep beneath the earth. But the question remained unanswered. Who would be next? Time moved on, as it always did, and Edgewood's name became little more than a chilling tale that passed between generations. Locals avoided the area, often citing vague warnings to curious travelers. "Don't go to Edgewood," they'd say with uneasy glances. "It's not just haunted, it's cursed." But for those who did not heed the warnings, for those whose curiosity burned too brightly, there was still the allure of the unknown. And the town's legend, though buried deep within the fabric of local folklore, would never remain hidden for long. It was only a matter of time before someone would again seek the answers that had claimed the lives of so many before them. The next chapter in Edgewood's cursed tale began with a group of online urban explorers. This time, it wasn't an ambitious paranormal investigator or a documentary crew. They were ordinary thrill seekers. They'd heard the stories, sure, but they didn't believe in curses or shadows or things that went bump in the night. For them, Edgewood was just another abandoned town, another place to film, explore, and add to their growing list of haunted locations for their popular YouTube channel. Beyond the Boundaries, the group was led by Jason, a charismatic influencer with a penchant for filming the most dangerous, unexplored places. His channel had exploded in popularity, attracting millions of subscribers, all eager to see his team tackle locations thought to be too dangerous for the average person. With his camera in hand and his team, Sarah, Mark, and Leo, by his side, Jason set off for Edgewood, convinced it would make the perfect addition to their series. "Look at this place," Mark said, panning his flashlight over the decaying remains of the town. "This is insane. You can practically feel the history here." Sarah, ever the skeptic, shot him a nervous glance. "Yeah, well, I'm feeling more than just history. This place gives me the creeps." "Did you hear that?" They all stopped listening. The wind had picked up again, but it didn't sound like a normal breeze. There was something else, a low, grinding hum, almost as if the town itself was alive and breathing. Just the wind, Jason reassured her, grinning for the camera. This is what we came here for. The spookiness, the thrill. We're going to get some serious views with this one. Sarah wasn't convinced. She felt an odd tension in the air, a subtle pressure on her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, but she kept her thoughts to herself. It was just nerves, she told herself. It had to be. She was here to make a video, to get the likes and the views, just like the rest of them. They made their way deeper into the heart of Edgewood, the camera capturing every moment. The town, though long abandoned, felt oppressive. The houses that lined the streets were skeletal remains of what they had once been, the walls crumbling, windows shattered, and doors ajar, as if something or someone had hastily left behind. The wind whistled through the empty streets, the eerie sound playing on repeat as the group moved from building to building. "All right, let's check out the market square," Jason said, pulling out his map of the area. "We'll get a shot of the old vegetable seller stall. That's gotta be some good footage." Mark laughed. "Perfect. We can make it look like it's haunted by a ghost of a guy who used to sell pumpkins or something. Make it all dramatic and creepy." But as they approached the center of the square, something about the place stilled the air. The ground was cracked, the stalls in disarray, and the distant sound of rushing wind felt oddly muted, as if the world around them was being swallowed by the cursed earth beneath their feet. Jason set the camera down to get some more dynamic shots. The others scattered, half-heartedly exploring the area, filming snippets of the decaying stalls and peeling signs. Sarah, however, felt the pull of the stone circle in the distance. It was only a few hundred yards away, but it seemed to call to her. As she walked toward it, she noticed something that didn't sit right with her. There were fresh footprints in the dirt leading toward the stones. They were small, almost childlike. Her heart raced as she crouched to examine them. The prints were barely visible, but they were definitely there. Someone had been here, not just recently. There was something wrong about the depth of the prints, something unnatural. They sank too deep into the earth, almost as though the soil itself was swallowing them up. "Guys!" Sarah called out, but the others were too far away to hear her. She hesitated for a moment, her nerves causing her to second-guess everything. Was she just imagining it? Was it part of the thrill, the fear that came with visiting a place like this? Then, suddenly, she heard a soft voice, a whisper from the trees. "Leave." She froze. The voice wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Low, almost a growl. It seemed to reverberate through the air itself. The ground beneath her feet shifted again, this time a full tremor that made her stumble. She backed away, glancing around to see if anyone else had heard it. But they were too far off. The chill in the air deepened, and Sarah's breath turned to mist. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. As she turned to find the others, she felt the unmistakable sensation of being followed. She spun around quickly, but there was no one there. The silence that followed was deafening. "Guys!" she shouted, but her voice sounded distant in her own ears, swallowed by the oppressive air. She turned back toward the square and saw the faintest movement in the shadows. Just for a second, and then they were there. Shapes emerged from the darkness, figures that didn't belong. At first, Sarah thought they were figments of her imagination, her mind playing tricks on her. But no! These were real, solid, and terrifying. The shadows that stretched from the edge of the woods were not just shadows. They were twisted figures, grotesque and skeletal, their eyes glowing like pale embers in the night. Before she could react, they were closing in. Her heart pounded as she turned to flee, but the ground beneath her feet gave way. A root, thick and strong, reached out and wrapped around her ankle, pulling her to the ground with terrifying force. She screamed, trying to free herself, but the tendrils of the earth only tightened around her legs. Jason, Mark, and Leo came running toward her, but they too were caught by the land. The same roots rose from the ground, trapping them as they tried to fight against the rising earth. It was as if the very soil of Edgewood was alive and hungry. "No, please," Jason yelled. But the shadows were upon them now, and the camera, still rolling, captured everything. It was too late. The earth swallowed them whole, and the camera fell to the ground, its lens facing up to the night sky. When the authorities arrived, they found the town empty once again. No trace of the explorers remained, not even a footprint. And so the legend of Edgewood continued. Another group lost to the land's insatiable hunger. Another story added to its dark, twisted history. But what of the footage they captured? Would anyone believe it? Would anyone be foolish enough to try and uncover the truth of Edgewood? Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Some legends are better left in the dark. The hunger of Edgewood would never end, and its curse would remain ever waiting, ever watching. Who will be next?